By the time you are watching this, Anthropic's Fable 5 model might already be back online. I'm recording this video a couple of days after Anthropic has suspended access to Fable 5 for all of its customers. It is quite likely that in the coming days the model might become available again, and there is a lot of very good coverage on who said what, why the model access had been revoked, and what the potential causes are. However, what happened last week will not just unhappen just because the model gets available again. In the history of GenAI, this is the first time a government has actively reached into a commercial AI offering and shut it down. So that capability is real now, it has been used, and it worked. In this video, I want to cover what outlasts these headlines of the last couple of days and what will set the strategic direction for AI in the coming years. Hi, my name is Bernard Bonasek. I'm a cybersecurity consultant living in Vienna, and if you are building on AI, this channel is where I work through what these shifts mean for the people building and deploying software. So let's dive in, and let's start with some context to understand what was going on. Anthropic built and shipped its best model so far, Fable 5, and was ordered to shut it down by the US government after 3 days for all people without an American passport. Since the company couldn't do that selectively, they shut it down for all of their clients. There's a whole soap opera about who called whom, who decided what to do, and there is really a lot of coverage around those things. I will put some in the video description. I'm skipping all of that on purpose in this video since it doesn't matter too much and it will be forgotten in a couple of weeks probably. The really interesting thing though is this: a government just proved it can switch off a frontier model whenever it decides to do so. Based on that happening, let's now dive into the 5 themes that might result from this event in the near to medium term future of GenAI. Let's get started.
The first theme, the presence of the off switch itself in the AI model. Let's take a more detailed look at the announcement made by Anthropic last week. It says the US government, citing national security authorities, has issued an export control directive to suspend all access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5. This means the US government has proven it can switch off frontier models at any time of its choosing, and the presence of such an off switch is something you need to take into account in your risk assessments. Let's take a more detailed look at this. In the old world, it would usually be sufficient to take a look at the uptime risk of a vendor, the latency, and of course the price of the model. We also saw price changes in the last couple of months being also a source of vendor risk. But now what changed? We have a new kind of risk. The government can flip the model on and off, and the decision might not really depend on who you are, but might more depend on what kind of passport you have. This new risk belongs into your architecture review, sitting next to every other single point of failure in your system, which raises the obvious question. If you run one of these labs like Anthropic and you now know that this switch is real, what's your move? This brings us to the second theme, the creation of export-grade AI. It could happen that the government decides this is now something they want to keep a closer look at, and it wasn't just a one-off thing that was happening last week. And as a frontier lab, you don't just sit around waiting to get switched off. Put yourself in Anthropic's seat. You know a government will flip that switch by nationality with no warning. So what do? You split the product itself into 2 tiers. A similar thing happened in the 1990s with encryption. You would have a full-strength version of the encryption that you put on the US market, and you would have a weakened version that can be exported. Something similar now might be happening in the AI world. You could have a model with full power that is used for the US market and a different version that is exported with, of course, capped capabilities. We nearly watched the live version of this happening last week before Fable 5 was banned, because we saw in the Anthropic announcement itself, when they announced the model, that they split the model into one version, Mythos 5, which had the full capabilities but was just released for a small group of cyber defenders and infrastructure providers, and into the restricted version called Fable 5 with very strong safeguards around it. There is a catch in that plan though. To sort people by nationality, you first have to know their nationality, and at an API call level right now you cannot. Which brings us to the third theme, the introduction of KYC for AI. Know your customer processes could guarantee in the future that the frontier labs know exactly who is trying to use their models. The US order said no foreign nationals, and Anthropic couldn't comply because there is no passport check on an API call, so they had to shut down the model for everyone. The tiering we just talked about in tier number 2 could force them to build one. Identity and nationality verification gets baked into model access the way it got baked into banking. Know your customer for inference. If we take a more detailed look at this, such an ID or passport check before using the model might enable the frontier labs to actually give you the better version. This could lead to regions offering these frontier models like the US to become a very attractive destination for researchers, something a researcher on Twitter already called the zone of thought. If we stack those three things up, the switch, the tiers, and the ID checks, they share one quiet assumption. Your model runs on somebody else's computer, which is exactly what people will start trying to escape, and which will lead us to number 4, open weights. One model a government can't switch off, can't tier, and can't ID gate is the one running on your own hardware. Open models such as DeepSeek, Qwen, or Mistral. At the moment, they are still of a lower quality than what you would get in these frontier models. What they have instead is permanence. Once the weights sit on your hardware, they can't be pulled out from under you. After last week, that's the feature that moves budgets. And Anthropic's own people put the capability gap at 7 to 10 months. So, which means in 7 to 10 months, you could get capabilities close to the ones we just got taken away of in Fable and Mythos in the open weights market, and you could run them in your own hardware. However, now the government could be backed into a corner. If everyone runs the model that can't be switched off, switching off the cloud frontier level models is kind of pointless. The government could go after the model weights themselves. Once the capable models are the open ones, you can download. Blocking access is pointless. You can't switch off something that's already sitting on 10,000s of laptops. So the control moves upstream to whether you are allowed to release open weights at all. That's a hard fight, and of course not all of the frontier labs building open weight models are in the US. They are in China and other parts of the world. And again, this has parallels to how the encryption fight in the 1990s went. Back then, the open lost a decade before it won. Now, independent of how long it will take these open weight models to reach the same level of capabilities such as Mythos and Fable, the real question becomes, will it still be possible to download them in the future, and what will happen if these same level of capabilities are reached with the open weight models?
So with these potential consequences now lined out, what do you do with that information? Honestly, I don't know how these 5 themes will play out in the future. Anyone who tells you they are certain are probably still guessing. These are bets about where things are heading, and the timing, of course, could be way off. That being said, my advice at this moment is the following. If you are building systems that depend on AI models, be prepared to switch the models to models from other vendors, and also be prepared to switch to open weight models in particular. It might also be worth it looking into how running open weight models yourself would be compatible with your current architecture. And finally, I recommend you to treat the risk of your AI vendor restricting or shutting down access to your current AI model as a risk in your threat modeling.